at watching Bush up there, the burnout drug addict, bumbling and stuttering and looking completely disingenuous and looking like a character out of central casting for a psychopath, burbling and arrogantly snapping at blind reporters, telling them take their sunglasses off. I mean, just all of it. He was just out of central casting. They chose him to squeeze and squeeze the public into submission, to make the public rebel against him. I remember reading different letters written by different imperial kings of Rome known as Caesars, including Caesar the First, Caesar, Julius Caesar, Caesar Augustus, and the rest of them, Constantine, all of them. They would brag to the Senate knowing that even the general public in Rome didn't read a lot. There were only proclamations, broadsheets handed out. Only the wealthiest had books done by scribes. And so they would brag how they were manipulating people, and they'd talk about one of the provinces of Rome to the east or to the north or to the south in North Africa, or to the west in Germania and Gaul and Britannia. They called it Albion at the time. Albion, Judea, all the different holdings. And they would, when they first dominated and took over, they would put in a corrupt, abusive leader. A lot of times they'd put in one of the tribal chiefs of the group they just overthrown. They'd put in someone unpopular with the tribes. And then after a few years, they would publicly execute him. Of course, the stupid thug would never realize how they were being set up. And then they would send in a Roman general who would save them from the tribal chief. Well, we gave you the leader you wanted, but now you'll accept a Roman legate. And it's the same thing. Oh, George W. Bush was so bad when he was nothing but a complete front man, a puppet. And now, they gave you Obama, and he had those first few months to ram through all the different pieces of tyranny, all the different pieces of legislation, the federalization of the states, the expansion of homeland security. But a lot of his agenda is stalling. The greenhouse gas takeover bill has passed the House, but it's stalling in the Senate. They'll probably still pass it, but we've got to fight tooth and nail. His massive gun restriction bills are now stalled. His open border legislation is stalled. His entire criminal agenda is stalled, and I'm telling you, he's going to pull an ace card out of his sleeve, and it's going to be stage terror or some type of flu outbreak panic. I mean, if they almost shut down society for 2 or 3 deaths, imagine if it's just a regular flu season and it's killing 30,000+ like it normally does. It'll be the end of freedom. They got the forced inoculations ready, the FEMA camps, all of it. Or will it be a total financial collapse? What is that ace card?
Understand you, man.
So I just played you Michael Savage. Now telling the truth, no longer Michael Weiner. I can play you Keith Uberman with Dick Cheney publicly being reported wanting to stage terror attacks on our own ships in the Strait of Hormuz to blame it on Iran a year and a half ago. At that time, we had Ray McGovern, former chief CIA analyst for Ronald Reagan and George Bush Sr. on, saying on air that the inside word was they were planning a Gulf of Tonkin against our ships in the Strait of Hormuz or in the Gulf. And then, of course, it came out a year later that in 2007, we learned in 2008, that is exactly what Dick Cheney was planning. MSNBC, New Yorker magazine. Then it also came out the White House memo, Bush's plan to fly a U.S. aircraft low over and over again, hoping Iraqis would shoot it down, painting it up as a UN aircraft to then lie and say that the UN aircraft had been shot down and that Saddam had broken his truce. The issue here is that they do this over and over again. So I thought I'd pull up this article. CFR Hart suggests false flag event from Iran war. This from September 27th, 2007, right when all of our sources, multiple former CIA, multiple current Pentagon, were all telling us on and off air the same thing. Blow up a ship, blow up a ship, blow up a ship. Admiral Fox Fallon quit shortly after, saying he wouldn't be part of a provocation. Do you get what we're dealing with? And if you think Obama won't do something like this, don't hold your breath, folks. Now, let me read the unsolicited advice of the government of Iran. Gary Hart's letter, published in multiple newspapers and the Huffington Post and delivered to the Swiss embassy in Tehran. The Swiss embassy is where the U.S. takes care of its diplomatic business. Does not have an official embassy since it was overrun in 1980. Unsolicited advice to the government of Iran. Presuming that you are not actually ignorant enough to desire war with the United States, you might be well advised to read the history of the sinking of the U.S.S. Maine in Havana Harbor in 1898 and the history of the Gulf of Tonkin in 1964. This is Gary Hart of the Hart-Rudman Council on Foreign Relations Policy Board that drew up the entire Homeland Security Plan and was clearly involved in the 9/11 architecture. I'll just leave it there. Having done so, he continues, you will surely recognize that Americans are reluctant to go to war unless attacked. Until Pearl Harbor, we were even reluctant to get involved in World War II. For historians of American wars, the question is whether we provoke provocations. So he's saying here, we provoke provocations. He lists the U.S.S. Maine and Havana Harbor blown up, and the Gulf of Tonkin in 64 fake attack that never even happened. Thank God they didn't even blow up a ship. They just said it was blown up, but that did lead to over 1 million dead Vietnamese and 58,000 Americans dead and 300,000 with the arms and legs blown off and bullets wounds, shattered spinal cords. The list goes on and on. But again, this is Gary Hart. Presuming that you are not actually ignorant enough to desire war with the United States, you might be well advised to read the history of the sinking of the U.S.S. Maine in Havana Harbor in 1898 and the history of the Gulf of Tonkin in 64. And if you read those histories, it's admitted they were staged. Having done so, you will surely recognize that Americans are reluctant to go to war unless attacked. Until Pearl Harbor, we were even reluctant to get involved in World War II. For historians of American wars, the question is whether we provoke provocations. He continues, given the unilateral U.S. invasion of Iraq in 2003, you're obviously thinking the rulers have changed, that the rules have changed. The provocation is no longer required to take America to war. But even in this instance, we were led to believe that the mass murder of American civilians, Osama bin Laden, was lurking, literally or figuratively, in the vicinity of Baghdad. So he repeats here the fake provocation of saying that bin Laden was working with Saddam inside Iraq. Then he finishes up the letter when we get back, and then straight to your phone calls right here on this live transmission, Wednesday, the 22nd day of July, 2009. I am Alex Jones. The websites are PrisonPlanet.tv and Infowars.com. PrisonPlanet.tv is the attack coordinates in the Infowar. Don't forget the free podcast at Infowars.com. Right there in the top left-hand corner, it says Listen Page. Free podcast, free archives, all there. And I know most of you know about the free podcast, 165,000 of you downloading it for free every day. How about you tell your friends, your family, your neighbors about the free podcast? Because that's the way people listen to radio now. That's the future. And that's so they listen how they want, when they want, where they want. So subscribe to the free podcast at Infowars.com. Your calls are coming up. But I wanted to just finish up with this thought dealing with government-sponsored terrorism. It is a public secret in academia. It is a public secret in the foreign service. It is an open secret in intelligence. It is an open secret in the military. I didn't know this till this weekend, but it's an open secret to Milton Friedman. In books he wrote. I knew about his economic view, but never read any of his books, and had a chance to look at a book that quoted one of his books, and then to actually get one of his books yesterday, where he talks about how you have 9 months to stage crises as a president or as a leader to get your agenda through. And I always wondered why the establishment had that 9-month rule. I knew about the 9-month rule. We pointed out that Bush staged the 9/11 events, or his handlers did, in conjunction with being in office about 8.5 months. He was in office from January 21st, and then, of course, 9/11 happened roughly 8.5 months later. You can already see that with USA Today reporting that Obama has the lowest approval rating ever recorded. Now you would think that should be the headline.